The year is 2014, and I had just discovered the novel called The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald thanks to my summer reading list for pre-P English. Lucky for me, my favorite director Baz Luhrmann had graced the world with a film adaptation of the same novel only the year before. Now I say graced in a very opinionated view, as not everyone felt that way, especially not the very same English teacher who had assigned the reading to my class in the first place. This teacher felt that the movie was not what she expected because of the modern elements within the music and the overall production.
What's so powerful about this novel is everyone has their own interpretation of these characters, and it's such a voyeuristic novel. The way Fitzgerald writes these scenes, you feel like you're in the room with these people, so I feel like everyone has their own intimate understanding and relationship with it.
The film begins with a grainy black and white intro that mimics 1920s film along with soft instrumental jazz. This transitions and is an interesting contradiction to the bright colors and extravagant music that will accompany the roller coaster events soon to follow. The use of loud music, fast camera movements, and vibrant colors is not only prevalent in movies made by the director Baz Luhrmann, but also helps convey the excitement of the 1920s party life and dramatic events within the book in sensory ways that the book just can't. And the purpose of changing from the black and white color in this opening scene is not only a fascinating intro and just cool to watch, but it also gives a sense of change and adaptation between the two different mediums. It's a way of conveying that we are about to witness a film that has a skeleton of the original text but is embellished with new ideas and visual representation that we'll be jumping right into in this video. In my younger and more vulnerable years, my father gave me some advice that I've been turning over in my mind ever since. Whenever you feel like criticizing anyone, he told me, just remember that all people in this world haven't had the advantages you've had. This is the opening lines in The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald, where Nick does not agree nor disagree with his father's advice, but says that he is still turning it over in his mind. And what he calls his younger and more vulnerable years, Nick must have voiced his complaints towards others aloud, thus subjecting a comment such as this from his father in the first place. However, he admits that he is still prone to judgment. These first few paragraphs reveal Nick's superiority he feels over others and a fear of slipping into the tendencies of his ego. He goes on to introduce Gatsby, the man who gives his name to this book, was exempt from my reaction. Gatsby, who represented everything for which I have unaffected scorn. Gatsby's confidence, riches, and status are outwardly presentations that Nick really admires. He then quickly criticizes what is beneath the glitz and glamour. No, Gatsby turned out all right at the end. It is what preyed on Gatsby, what foul dust floated in the wake of his dreams and temporarily closed out my interest in the abortive sorrows and short-winded elations of men. Nick was never interested in Gatsby's internal affairs, what he felt and desired from life, unless it wasn't messy. When Gatsby reveals that he himself is as imperfect as any other person, Nick suddenly becomes uninterested. It is this attitude that leaves Nick in a state of pervasive loneliness. His interest in retelling Gatsby's story stems from this selfish desire to be referred to as the well-rounded man, as he says. Nick despises observation of people and situations from a variety of lenses, and he prefers to observe what is plainly shown in front of him. He tells us this when he says, life is much more successfully looked at from a single window. And we will continue to see examples of Nick's narrowed point of view as we continue. So, the movie chooses to pair the same opening paragraph from Nick Carraway in the novel as it looks at the green light. The choice to show the green light in the film with this portion of the text pairs Nick's judgmental tendencies with Gatsby's inner desires. It also is positioned on the screen so that the audience is looking through Gatsby's perspective at the green light. And this to me communicates that although Nick is the initial perspective we are given vocally, the film wants us to sympathize more so with Gatsby. Whether this is realized by the audience or not, I believe it sort of naturally happens as we proceed through the film. Unlike the book, the film shortens Nick's rant towards others and towards Gatsby. Although he takes out the majority of Nick's apathetic monologue, he decides to add that
back then, all of us drank too much. The more in tune with the times we were, the more we drank. And none of us contributed anything new.
this leads to judgment regarding any current and future Gatsby adaptations. So, the novel is often referred to as the perfect representation of the 1920s without knowledge of impending future that would soon follow. This book is written before the Depression era began, and thus there's no hint of the events that would later transpire. Therefore, the characters are written exactly as they would have been in that time. They're caught up in the trials and tribulations of love affairs, money, and social hierarchy. Although their lifestyles are considered exorbitant, they are also considered by characters such as Nick to be desirable rather than wasteful and destined to end. However, if that is true, can any readings of The Great Gatsby after the 1920s exist without interpretation of it alongside the Depression that begins just before the 1930s? Can a reader follow along a story so engulfed in new and old money without thinking about the ignorance of its characters? Personally, I find it impossible to abandon that knowledge, thus any adaptations following will bear that regard as well. This is where the idea comes into play that the text is constantly molded and shaped by history, the events that have passed and followed the text. While nothing may be able to capture the ignorant bliss and distraction that Fitzgerald's original text was able to, Baz Luhrmann's decision not to ignore this and to have it as a possible disadvantage from foresight, it sort of works in his favor. He uses it to create a new layer to the story. Because the characters did not know what lay ahead of them, the reckless behavior with money does suggest consequences will follow, just Fitzgerald wasn't aware of what those consequences would be. Baz Luhrmann and the rest of the world do, and maybe that's not such a bad thing. While all of Baz Luhrmann's adaptations involve turning something old into something modern, it is not inherently negative to do so if done well, which he has done with both Romeo plus Juliet and The Great Gatsby, judging by its success alone. This is because he realizes those trending things, such as music, affect how we see everything, so he incorporates them while still giving tribute to the style of the 1920s. The inclusion of modern elements, rather than only taking in the nostalgic components of the 1920s, also illustrates what the 1920s were all about. It was about embracing the way the world has adapted and changed rather than fighting against it. So it makes sense that Baz would do the same for his own time period when trying to accurately replicate the mood of the past. Anyways, that's all for this review of Baz Luhrmann's adaptation of The Great Gatsby. I hope you guys really enjoyed it, and I hope that you got something from it, and have a great rest of your day.